everything.
Hello world! Hello Kapansitan! I'm Mike Calizo coming from Wellington, New Zealand, and welcome to our fourth episode of PaNZIT podcast and second on our public cloud series. And today we are here and we managed to invite Clarence Bakirtzidis. Somehow it's difficult to pronounce your last name, mate. So
that was pretty good.
That's awesome.
Did it well.
And and today we are recording this to talk about Arrow and Azure. And Clarence is based in Australia, but I'll give Clarence a time to introduce himself properly. So how are you, Joseph? How are you today?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to our podcast. Thank you for the feedback as well. We're really receiving good feedbacks, and some of them actually requested for an Azure session. So here's the answer.
Exactly.
And good day to all our Australian listeners and viewers. So hope everyone is doing good. And
Yeah. Cool. So Clarence, why don't you introduce yourself? But before going there, how's Australia today? How's the flood? Is that affecting you at all?
Yeah, thankfully I'm down in Melbourne. Thankfully it's okay here. Just looking outside, it's kind of overcast, not the best weather, but can't complain. If you're looking on the news, you'll be seeing what's going on up in Sydney. So our prayers and thoughts for them. Hopefully that will finish up soon and they can get back to normal life. But yeah, it's been quite devastating.
Yeah, it's like 1 in 50 years, I believe. So
50 or 100 I've heard as well. Yeah,
Anyway, so I think I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. You tell us a bit more about yourself. What you do. What are the things that keeps you busy? What do you do in your downtime, for example? And, we'll go back to the technical. We are all techies here. What are the exciting technical stuff that that keeps you awake, makes you wake up in the morning?
the blood running.
Things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess So we want a bit of a personal intro first, or So as you know, I'm born and raised in Melbourne. So in some ways, might think a bit boring because I've always lived in Melbourne. So actually, my parents I've got a Greek background, so they immigrated to Australia in the 70s, and somehow they ended up choosing Melbourne. Sort of been here ever since. So I've travelled a fair bit around around the world. But yeah, in terms of what I do, well, I've got a family. I've got wife and 2 kids, 2 boys, 8 and 10. Keep me very busy. They're into soccer, video games, reading, all of that kind of stuff. Personally, what do I like doing? I think I'm an outdoors person. So I like hiking. I do trail running. I try to keep fit, and as a family, we do camping when we can. So I love doing camping. So in proper, tents and everything. And I must say, I know you guys are from New Zealand. That's one of my favorite countries in the world.
You should come sometimes.
Tick. Send me some stuff later. So I think it was about 2 years ago. So before the pandemic, we did a family trip to the South Island. So that's probably one of the most memorable trips I've done in my life. So it's I'd highly recommend it to anyone if you get the chance to go to the South Island.
We're actually going there this this holiday. Me and my 4 kids and my wife. For 8 days. We're going to see the Queenstown again. That becomes my favorite place to visit.
We flew into Queenstown.
Clarence, I'm a bit of a foodie. Is it true that in the Greek culture, in the Greek family and Greek background, you really enjoy a lot of food, eh?
Yeah, there's a lot of definitely a lot of home cooked meals.
Comfort food and all.
Yeah, and also emphasis on variety and eating healthy. I'd say I'm not your traditional kind of
Yeah.
Greek kind of background person, because you'd probably think I'm into all the
Yeah.
lamb and the souvlaki,
Yeah.
but actually I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
vegetarian.
Yeah, that shows why the body is so lean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that
And
and probably the running.
probably because of the trail running. What's the longest trail running distance you've got?
I think about 25 kilometers. I'm still
Oh,
working towards doing a full marathon.
right.
But as you probably know, trail running, it's not usually flat. It's very
It is not.
hilly.
Yep.
So it's
Exactly.
a lot harder than just a
And
normal run.
I did one for the North Face back in the Philippines back then. It was a 50-kilometer run.
Oh, wow.
I
That's
did not
impressive.
finish. I surrendered on the 40th kilometer because
Oh,
my running mates were injured, so that's why we cut
Yeah.
it short. So, but it was a very good experience, nevertheless. Yeah, trail running is
Yeah,
nice.
great.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so much about our personal styles, and I know there's a lot of things that we really enjoy outside of work. But maybe Clarence, it would be nice if you can share us a bit about your career journey before joining Microsoft, and maybe this sounds a little bit too serious, but what's your guiding principle when it comes to career growth moving forward to your present career right now?
Yeah, I guess just a little bit around how I started. I had an early interest in technology, so I started off doing all these electronics kits, basically when I was in primary school.
Yeah.
So I think it's closed down now, but we used to have a store called Dick Smith Electronics.
Yep.
Something like a Tandy Electronics. Buy these kits, and my mum would buy me these kits, and I'd follow the instructions. Initially, it's just like a breadboard, and then you progress to soldering. And I bought all these cool things like a blowtorch and stuff, and yeah, it was fun. But it was not until I got a Commodore 64, right? So I got a Commodore 64 8-bit machine, and I came with a little book that teaches you how to program. I thought, what's this? So I started going through, programming with BASIC, creating sprites. So I'd draw a little grid on a paper and draw my little little characters.
Yeah.
And then I thought, this is awesome. I want to do this. But at that time, there was I don't know if it's just my perception, but there was a little bit of a perception that programming was not a real career, right? It's for hackers. It's that changed, I think, in my final year of uni, where I realized that software is eating the world. You've got to get into that.
Yes.
So in my final year, I changed all my subjects to software subjects and never looked back. So I've been in the IT industry about 21 years now.
Wow. Yeah.
On childhood. Yeah.
From childhood to now enjoying the bleeding edge technology.
That's right. And in terms of you asked me like how I've sustained my career and what I've done to sort of progress.
Yep.
I think a big part of that is putting myself in uncomfortable situations. So a few times I've made some career changes where you do have the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I think that also spurs you on, right?
It does.
You do sweat it a bit, but it keeps you up late studying, learning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Same thing for me. I think we should do an episode on imposter syndrome. It's very common.
I think I'm guilty of that as well.
Yeah.
But, look at it on the positive side, I would say. It actually makes it can make or break a person, but most of the time, people like us who are into challenging ourselves will always make
and it helps. It helps speaking to people with similar experience, right? Just like what we're doing now.
Absolutely.
Because you're not the only one experiencing it.
Yeah, if you talk to any successful person, they'll tell you about their humble beginnings and what they've gone through. So it kind of makes you feel better that you can relate to those people. So surround yourselves with mentors, learn from others. Don't be afraid not to know everything, and just focus on a few key areas to build some depth.
Yeah,
that's really valuable tip.
One. Who was that person who said, standing on the shoulders,
the
giants.
I think.
I love that statement as well.
Yeah,
Thomas Edison, I think.
Isaac Newton or someone.
Isaac Newton, All right. Anyway, we segue a little bit, right? So, but I think what you've said there, Clarence, apply as well on why you managed to join Microsoft. So I'm going to ask you a bit about that. So how did you join Microsoft, and what's the best thing about working for Microsoft?
Yeah, that's a quite interesting story, because prior to joining Microsoft, I think I spent at least 10 years in the open source space. So I will admit that I was a bit of an anti-Microsoft person. So I thought it was, if you're running Windows, you're uncool. You're doing .NET, you're uncool. So I was doing, I think I was doing, Ruby on Rails and using Linux and doing all those cool things. But a few years ago, my perception started to change, because I started seeing all these things in the news about Microsoft's getting into Linux, they're open sourcing .NET, they've created VS Code, TypeScript, a lot of these sort of tools. I thought, that's strange. And it was not actually until I watched this podcast. It was one of my favorite podcasts at the time, called Go Time. It's a podcast that focus on Go programming. And I think it was the four of the hosts were actually Microsoft employees, I believe. And I thought, this is strange. And then there was one episode they were talking about how Microsoft doesn't force them to use Microsoft products. They're allowed to use a Mac. They can, engage with the open source communities. And I thought, this is amazing. So immediately after that episode, I jumped onto LinkedIn and I searched for, who do I know that works at Microsoft? I just so happened to have a first level connection from the Docker community. And we got talking, and from there on, he passed my CV on, and the rest is history. But awesome. I must say, though, at the time, I had never used Azure when I joined Microsoft. So I didn't have previous cloud experience. So they're very open-minded, and they're talking about growth mindset, right? So it's about the way you think, your willingness to grow and learn, and versus fixed mindset. So that really resonated well. Being in Microsoft just over 2.5 years now. So
wow.
I'm still loving it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Cool.
No, that's really cool. And I think one crucial moment was, I think it was Satya Nadella who went on stage and spoke with Red Hat. There was this huge logo saying Microsoft loves Red Hat. So that's definitely a major changer right there. But as an Azure tech specialist yourself, Clarence, what's a standard day at the office looks like for you? Like, for example, just today, what does it look like?
Yeah, well, as you can probably see, my office for the last year has been at home, but I think we're very well equipped for remote work even before COVID hit. So I had the flexibility to work from home when I wanted to. But I guess a typical day would be a mix of having customer conversations, because I'm a technical essentially a technical specialist, like a pre-sales consultant. But so my team tends to specialize in specific products and services. So we have this cool name. My team is the Global Black Belt Team, right? I don't actually have any martial arts qualifications, so I did try Wing Chun for a little while, but didn't make it very well.
That's so good.
So our team, we focus on specific areas. So my team is a cloud native team. So things like Kubernetes, OpenShift, a lot of the open source technology is sort of in that space. So what I'll do is I work closely with customers to understand what they're trying to do. Maybe they're trying to migrate onto Azure. Maybe they're using a lot of open source tools. And it's more around advising them, should they go onto Kubernetes? Should they use a PaaS platform? What's the best approach? So some of it is like maybe best practices, reviewing their architecture, helping them with the POC, those types of things. And our team, we have close connections with our product and engineering teams, typically in the States. So we're kind of like a conduit to provide feedback to them, but also provide updates to the field in terms of roadmap, previews, and those sorts of things. Outside of the customer conversations, I do also things like workshops, training, webinars. If you've attended any of our free webinars, you might have seen a recorded webinar where there's someone like Brendan Burns, and then there'll be this person, Clarence, doing Q&A, typing frantically to answer your questions. That's me. And we do other things like open hacks, where it's more of a hands-on, 3 days.
That's right.
Yeah, and Mike and myself, we've also
I
done
remember that, of course.
Azure
The webinar.
OpenShift workshop.
Yeah.
So that's actually how we met, and Joseph was on that too.
Yeah. And that becomes history. I think we talk a lot because we have some customers that is crossover, and we are going to have a meeting again on Thursday to talk about one other customer.
Yeah. So I really enjoy working with the Red Hat folks. Because I'm also learning a lot about OpenShift through you guys.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's good. And I think the collaboration between Microsoft partners and Red Hat partners is really healthy.
Correct.
And we've seen that a lot. And collaborating going to the market is really good. But what I want to ask next is, can you tell us more about Azure's as a public cloud, the exciting features that really differentiate from other public cloud, and highlighting the collaboration that we have as well, say for example Red Hat and other partners that you have.
Before you answer that question, Clarence, maybe you should show us the entirety of your shirt, because you can only see the top. There you go.
There you go.
Now you can answer the question.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Look, I mean, look, there's all the major clouds have their kind of the areas where they're better or good at, right? I think with Azure, I think we've come a long way in that. I think open source is really like in everything we do now. So not only with the Azure Red Hat OpenShift offering, where we're the first to market to have such a jointly engineered with Red Hat, but also managed platform. But I'd say partnership. So I think there's this perception, in the past, Microsoft would come in and dominate the market. Now it's a lot more about partnerships. So whether it's like Red Hat, VMware, Pivotal, SAP, there's a lot of our partners, and it's a win-win situation. And we understand, right, that customers themselves, they're not going to run necessarily like 100% of their footprint just in one cloud. They're going to do multi-cloud. They're going to keep things on-prem. So I think we've adapted to what customers need. So it's not just Azure. Like in terms of the cloud, it's also other things like the Power Platform, Dynamics, Office 365. I don't cover those so much, but they are kind of what we call, our cloud. But some of the differentiators, I'd say, we've always been developer-centric and developer-first. So with the acquisition of GitHub a few years ago, I think that's added a lot of value to our kind of complete portfolio. A big emphasis on containers. So pretty much all our computing platforms run containers of some form, whether that's OpenShift, Azure Kubernetes service, container instances, our machine learning service. So containers are kind of hand in hand, open source containers, and now we're really focusing on portability. So trying to not necessarily have you locked in, but say you need to run. Customers want to run a consistent platform anywhere. So we're starting through products like Azure Arc, where you can connect clusters like Kubernetes clusters outside of Azure, but they look and feel like Azure. So you have the same APIs, the same RBAC, and you can add like monitoring and so forth to get the visibility in the Azure portal. But exciting things, which some of it's probably on NDA, so I can't tell you, but just in the future, you'll see is Azure services being decoupled from Azure. So let's say there's a service you really like a PaaS service or something, and you'll be able to run that outside of Azure. So we're starting to bring more of our services where you can run them where you want to run them. And I'd say the other part is,
So that's really good segue to the one of my favorite topic, which is basically hybrid cloud. So decoupling features from Azure itself and for customers to be able to run it anywhere. Is that an approach of Azure business unit in Microsoft to actually embrace hybrid as well, hybrid pattern of deployment?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So it's addressing that hybrid need. So it's not just about having, a fast dedicated connection, but also
Yes.
if you're running things on premises, you're going to use different services, right? So for example, you might be using Azure Service Bus in the cloud, but then on premises, you're going to use RabbitMQ or something. Now, there's nothing wrong with that product, but it's now a different product. So if you could take Azure Service Bus and run that on premises, you're going to have consistency. So we're starting to kind of build those sorts of things where customers will be able to run those same services outside of Azure, and they can choose where they want to run it. Do they want a fully managed offering in the cloud, or do they want to take some ownership and run that on their own infrastructure, or do they need to also run it across multiple clouds? So that's, I think, where we're going. And on top of that is also a lot of the open source stuff, which is nothing to do with Azure or Microsoft. So things like Dapper, which is the distributed application runtime that we're building, that lets you build and run microservices more easily, and its integrations with all the clouds. So there's nothing specific to Azure there. There's a lot of investment in building tooling to make the overall developer experience more productive.
That's very interesting, and that's very exciting approach, because I personally believe that not everything that customers use, enterprise use, is going to be on the public cloud.
Correct.
Just because of multiple factors that is preventing that to happen, and having that approach to hybrid is really awesome. Now, another question in relation to that, or another one of my favorite topic is about Windows containers, because if you look at the lay of the land right now in the customer or the enterprise, there will be more than 50% Windows application or Windows-based application running, and these are the workload that seems to be difficult to adapt to containerization because of the way it was built, and to refactor and re-architect this, it will cost a lot of money and effort on the customer's end. So, but Kubernetes has this Windows containers as well. So what is your opinion on that? Have you looked at that specific subject yourself?
Yeah, we have. So it's actually a lot of work going on in Microsoft to bring Windows containers, up to parity with Linux. So, Linux sort of had a head start with containerization. Windows containers, as you probably know, they tend to be heavier weight, larger footprint, and missing some capability. So there's a lot of efforts, I'd say last year and this year, the big focus on closing some of those gaps. And part of that is just generally around the Windows container technology, and some of that is adding that into our specific Azure services, like AKS. So we don't currently have the support in Azure Red Hat OpenShift. That's coming in the future, but we do have it on Azure Kubernetes service. And I'd say there's a few with customers. Typically, we advise them, if you're doing greenfields, just go straight onto Linux containers. So if they're a traditional .NET developing, if they're doing traditional development on .NET, move to .NET Core, run that on Linux containers. But if they've got these legacy applications, often it's too costly to re-engineer those. So they might progressively carve off functionality to microservices, but you're probably going to have to move this monolithic application. And so we're typically seeing Windows containers being used for more lift and shift into containers, where they don't have either the time or the money to invest in re-architecting or rebuilding those. So it's not all or nothing, right? You might say, this legacy app, we're going to move it, but we could augment that with serverless functions, PaNZIT services. So new functionality could be built in those areas. But we do have, so personally, I've been working with a few customers already doing, in Australia, doing Windows containers on Kubernetes, and it's quite an interesting area. And we're closing those gaps, as I said, this year. So it's going to be exciting to help those customers with those bits and pieces that they need.
And it's, sorry, Joseph, staying on the same topic, because I really like this conversation, right? So there are still Windows workload that possibly can be containerized because of the work that's happening in the Kubernetes community. What is your take on container virtualization? Like, moving the VM to a container as a container. So not the Knative. I can't remember
the
KubeVirt is the project. Yeah. So is that something that Microsoft or yourself as a enthusiast also looking at?
I'd say, at least from what I've seen, there's not a lot of buzz around that. Though internally, we have had some of our peers experimenting, so running KubeVirt. They've managed to get it running even in AKS. And I know on OpenShift there's I think it's called OpenShift Container Virtualization or some sort of similar platform, which I think builds on KubeVirt, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So I personally don't have a lot of experience with it, but I can see the appeal of it because much like maybe, in the past people might be focused on using something like, vSphere to run their VM infrastructure. Well, Kubernetes has kind of become that common platform. So if you can run, Linux containers, Windows containers, and then even bring VM-based workloads that can't easily be containerized, then at least you've got the one control plane, the one set of tooling. So that's what you would skill up in as a administrator or an operations person. So I can see the appeal in there. I just haven't had a lot of time to look into it. But if you've got anything you want to share with me, I'd be happy to attend a session that you might run.
Actually, by the sounds of it, Clarence, it's like there's a lot of things happening at the background within individual space in Microsoft. So, and you already alluded to that some of them are currently NDA, and you cannot talk about it at this point. So maybe I'll tweak the question a bit. Instead of your news and emerging technologies from the Microsoft side, what do you think will happen in the next few years? Basically, your predictions about the future adoption in cloud native development space, since that's your area of expertise and all that.
I think in terms of we are sort of internally hearing about like in terms from the leadership, we're hearing kind of a few sort of themes, I'd say. So generally portability. So this is driven by customer demand. So we talked about things like open source, avoiding lock-in, supporting multi-cloud scenarios. Customers don't want to be locked into just one environment. So I'd say definitely portability, right? And having consistency wherever you run that. Serverless as well. So serverless beyond talking about, functions or Lambda on AWS, right? Serverless in terms of don't care about the underlying infrastructure. So potentially using abstractions to define what application needs are. Like I might need load balancing or scaling or time-based, scheduling. Don't care how it's implemented. And then I could then say, hey, Azure, deploy this for me, scale it for me, provide this level of service, quality of service. That's kind of, I think, where things are going. So less about Kubernetes will kind of, as much as we love it, but it'll probably be moving to the background. All right, it will be kind of the operating system hidden away.
That's it. It becomes the next Linux, really.
Correct.
That everybody is going to use. And the development will go on top of it.
Things have changed rapidly.
I really agree on that as well. That's my observation as well.
And then, kind of related, I guess, to the hybrid is edge computing. So a lot more emphasis on being able to run these sort of workloads at the edge. So typically containerized. So IoT, machine learning on the edge. It's not an area that I cover a lot, but quite interested in it. I think that's definitely growing. And then again, no code or low code. So that's becoming more popular. So there's a variety of different technologies in that space. But I think in the past, we talk about low code, no code. People sort of make fun of it, like, oh, you're not a real developer. That's kind of like a hack. But I think it's becoming more accepted and mainstream now, and I think it's going to become taken more seriously. So you can extend that beyond just like a Power App or something like that to things like, I'm not a machine learning expert, but I want to train a machine learning model. So then I can use it for this purpose, and people who are not experts deep in maths or statistics, they'll be able to come and build these applications and deploy those wherever they want to without having a deep understanding of Kubernetes or of programming. I think that's what we're going to see. So kind of this sort of serverless, low code, no code, and ML and AI for everybody. So you see proliferation of applications being built.
Interesting times, Mike.
That's really awesome when you mention about the low code, no code, because Joseph and I, we started developing our website, right? And then use Joomla and cPanel, and it's like, we are just putting together pictures there, and voila, we have the website. While before I was like developing PHP and HTML. And hard work, So that's interesting. And with regards to the edge, because that's another subject that I am interested in about. One thing that I notice is everybody's talking about containerizing the far edge, but in some cases, maybe containerizing the far edge is not the way to go as well, because there are equipments that should stay as an equipment and not really containerized, because there are ways of doing processing on the far edge and make a decision of what data you're going to send to the regional data center, or serving only. So these things are still being developed and conceptualized, but that is, I think, a very interesting technology to watch in the future.
Well, kind of related to that, I mean, containers is not the be all and end all. I don't know if you heard about an experiment that we have done called, I think it's called Crustlet, where you can run. It's basically WebAssembly, so you can deploy Kubernetes workloads that run on. I think it's like a WebAssembly kind of runtime. So there's no real container. It's basically using the same technology you would use. Like for example, running WebAssembly in a browser. I think it's written in the Rust language, but that's something which is kind of an experiment, but who knows, that might become a mainstream thing. So it's not necessarily, and that's essentially like a virtual machine, if you like. So it's not necessarily we need to run everything in containers. I think today that's kind of the solution that works, because we have that common packaging and runtime, and we have immutability to some extent. But that doesn't mean that that's going to be the only solution in the future. I'm sure there'll be other innovations.
There will be other, I'm sure, yeah. So I think the next question, because we're almost top of the hour here. Next question that I am going to ask is, for those who are interested to learn and build their career around, Azure, cloud native specifically as well, what are the advice that you could give when it comes to training and certification?
Yeah, I think we've done a lot of investment in this space. So there's a site called Microsoft Learn. You can probably put up the URL after the show, but I use that myself. There's a lot of free, it's all free material, and there's learning paths. So you could say, and some of them are aligned to a certification. So I could say, I'm interested in the Azure Developer Certification, and it'd say, this is the learning path. These are the different courses, and you go through that. There's been a lot of investment adding more and more. There's even a few Kubernetes courses up there. It's all free, and as I said, some of them are aligned to certification. So I think that would be the number one place to go, especially if you don't want to spend any money on anything. Obviously, there's like Pluralsight, Udemy, and all these sorts of places, but this is one that we've built. For the cloud native stuff, there's the Kubernetes. I think it's called the Learning Path. It's called like Learn Kubernetes in 50 Days, and there's a PDF that's got a number of resources. So it's got videos, it's got some links to the Microsoft Learn. Progressively goes through this 50 days of learning Kubernetes. We can probably again provide that link later. I think that's a good place. And then there's a lot of free events that we run. For example, we do a lot of Azure Red Hat OpenShift ones with you guys, but also if you look for Azure events, we have a lot of public webinars. We also have open hacks where they're hands-on 3 days sessions. But yeah, I'd say jump on some of those webinars, look for the subjects that you're interested in, whether that be like Kubernetes or serverless or whatever. Try those. And usually we provide resources in those as well.
No, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, Clarence. And as Mike said, we're running a bit out of time, but we really appreciate all the input and all the knowledge and all the information that you shared with us. But before we end, is there any last few words for those out there? You spoke about getting out of the comfort zone and taking your journey into another level. Any last few words for our listeners when it comes to that?
Oh, that's a big one. I'd say we're lucky today where there's probably too many resources, I'd say. So it's finding the right resources. So I think the best way to learn is by doing. So, set up a GitHub account, create some open source projects, share them with people get some feedback. Try to participate in user groups, network. So networking is a key aspect. And a lot of things are like conferences and user groups are virtual now. Like I joined some of the New Zealand ones now because they're virtual. I couldn't do that in the past.
Yeah.
And try to find a mentor. So look, if you some people might not like so like cold calling, but if you find someone on LinkedIn that you're connected to either as a first or second level, try to get connected. Most people are willing to share their experience about how they started and what they did to get to where they are. I don't think that's too much to ask for a bit of advice. And then lastly, jump in the deep end.
Yes.
I'm sure you'll learn to swim.
There you go. Great words from Clarence B himself. Jump in the deep end. For sure you will survive and learn how to swim. So that's all good.
That's right.
On that note, we would like to end this podcast. Again, Clarence, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
it's
you so
always
much,
a pleasure talking to you. And hopefully we get to speak to you again next time.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Bye.
And thanks, Mike, as well. And for those who haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and watch out for the website that we're going to be launching soon. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Thanks, Clarence, Mike. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.